Sure, here's the translation. Good evening, everyone. I've decided to share this story, but for safety reasons, I prefer to keep my identity anonymous. I still have fears about what happened and worry about the consequences. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me a few years ago in the United States. At the time, I was hired to do night surveillance for a building. The location had 5 small 2-story buildings. The owner was a millionaire who used that space as an office, and although he appeared sporadically, my job was to ensure everything stayed secure during the night. My main task was to stay at the reception, monitoring the cameras and reporting any unusual occurrences. Right at the beginning, I was informed that I should not go up to the 5th floor of the building because that floor was deactivated. Only the owner had permission to access that floor, so I followed that instruction without question. On a regular night, I was at the reception, distracted with my phone, when the night passed peacefully. I decided to do a round through the building, checking if everything was in order. That's when, as I reached the 4th floor, I heard knocks coming from the top floor, the one I had been forbidden to access. I was curious but tried to ignore it, until the knocks grew louder. Something inside me made me act. For the first time, I decided to go up to the 5th floor to investigate. When I arrived, I found a long corridor, and at the end of it, a door where the sounds were coming from. I approached cautiously and tried to open the door, but it was locked. I noticed something strange. The lock was double, installed on the outside. While I was standing there, my radio went off, and I heard the voice of the superintendent. He angrily warned me that the owner was watching me through the cameras. The man was monitoring the building during the night, and when he saw I was on the 5th floor, called the superintendent, furious. Still, I explained that I had gone up because I heard the noises, and he responded angrily, saying I shouldn't return to that floor. Without further discussion, I apologized and went back to my position, but a feeling of unease stayed with me. What were those knocks? And why was no one allowed to go up there? In the following days, curiosity consumed me. I continued working normally, but one more night I heard the persistent knocks again from the 5th floor. I tried to ignore them, but my curiosity grew stronger. I made a difficult decision, to go up again and find out what was happening. When I arrived, the knocks were even louder, and then I decided to knock on the door. I asked if anyone was inside, and in response the knocks intensified, as if someone were desperate. The response seemed to come from inside, with more intense knocking. My fear increased, but I knew I had to act before the owner noticed and caught me on the cameras again. I quickly went down, grabbed a hammer, and returned to the door. I knocked hard and managed to break the lock. When I opened the door, I was faced with a horrifying scene. A man was lying on the floor, taped up, with his mouth sealed. He was the one making the noises with his feet. Looking further in, I saw bodies in display cases, as if they were mannequins. And there was a huge freezer, containing more body parts. I couldn't react immediately. The shock took over me. When I was able to move, I began to untie the man, who desperately begged me to help him get out of that place because he was terrified of what awaited him. I asked him how he got there, and he told me a terrifying story. The owner, who appeared to be involved in shady dealings, had done something terrible to him, keeping him locked in that room to use him for his insane experiments. That story made me tremble with fear. He begged me to call the police, but my phone was at the reception, and the radio I had only allowed me to talk to the superintendent. I didn't know who to trust anymore. The man was badly hurt and could hardly walk, but still, we managed to get out of the room. As we began to descend the corridor, the building's lights suddenly went out, and I knew something was terribly wrong. The man told me to find a place to hide, but there was no safe place on that floor. So we began to go down the stairs, trying to stay calm as we heard footsteps below us. When a door opened, it became clear that someone was coming toward us. That someone was none other than the building's owner. He knew exactly where we were. With the man desperately by my side, we locked the corridor door and pushed a table to block the entrance, but he was relentless and soon broke down the door. He attacked me violently, putting his hands around my neck. The worst seemed about to happen, but at that moment, the man I had freed grabbed the hammer and struck the owner in the head, knocking him out. We quickly fled to the reception, where I grabbed my phone and called emergency services. They arrived quickly and cordoned off the area. What they found there was indescribable. The room with the bodies, the freezer, and the victims of the psychopath who had been arrested. That man is now in a maximum security prison. I still can't believe what I lived through. It was a nightmare, and the fear that he might escape from prison and come after me haunts me. The building was demolished, and today it's just a terrifying memory. I moved to another city, but that trauma continues to chase me. To be honest, this will haunt me for the rest of my life. Hello, my name is German. I'm from Mexico, but I've been living in Spain for over 20 years. I live on a rural property, located on the outskirts of Madrid, in an isolated area, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. My job was to take care of the farm during the night, which, by the way, is a huge place, with vast stretches of land. The farm was used by rich people, who rented it for social events like weddings and private parties. But what few know is that the land has a very dark and ancient history. Many years ago, that farm served as a temple for the Holy Inquisition, and thousands of people were tortured and lost their lives there. Imagine the kind of heavy energy that must still linger in that place. When I was hired to work there, I had no idea about any of this. I only discovered the true history after some time. Now I'm going to tell you about some of the inexplicable things I experienced there. One night, when I was in the entrance booth, I noticed a shadow moving across the farmyard. The area was almost completely dark, and I could barely see, but I managed to distinguish the figure of someone walking around. I rushed to the spot to investigate and saw that the shadow had entered an abandoned building, one of the many on the property. It was a place no one used. I climbed the stairs of the building and entered the upper floor. I thought it was just an ordinary person, so I shouted to warn them that they shouldn't be there. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't an ordinary person. It was a monk with a hood so large that it completely covered his face. The strangest part was that under the cloak nothing was visible. The face was completely absent, just a shadow. In fear, I dropped the flashlight. The man kept climbing the stairs without looking back or saying a single word. I didn't know what to do, so I began to slowly back away, heading back to the booth. However, when I passed by the yard again and looked at the building, I had the most horrible feeling of my life. I saw that man or thing hanging from the second floor, as if he had taken his own life. My heart raced and I instantly began to run to get away from that place. But when I almost reached the booth, I turned back and looked at the building, and there was no one there anymore. I knew that wasn't something human. The next day, I felt the need to tell someone what had happened. I spoke with my wife, but I don't know if she really believed me. However, she calmed me down and reassured me. But after that, things only got worse. I started hearing screams and moans coming from the back of the farm, sounds that clearly weren't from living people. In the first few days, I went to check, but I never found anything. After some time, I stopped investigating because it was clear that they weren't real people. One other night, during a round, I saw something even stranger. At the top of the same abandoned building, I saw a woman dressed completely in black, walking through the upper floor. She would briefly appear through the windows, as if she were watching something. I knew those were lost souls, people who had suffered terribly in that place. Whenever I saw something like that, I would simply walk away and lock myself in the booth, praying for the souls that still haunted that place. Today, if I had a cell phone with a camera back then, I would probably be famous for everything I could have filmed. But I'm not the only one who lived through these experiences. One of the caretakers who had worked there for years also told me several similar stories. He said even the guests who came for events at the farm had experienced inexplicable things. One day during a wedding, some girls ran out of the bathroom, very scared. They said that someone was screaming loudly in the bathroom, as if in great pain. But when they looked under the door, they saw a person dressed in a black robe and very old sandals. They tried to speak to the person, but there was no answer. When the caretaker went in to check, there was no one there, only the echo of silence. At another event, a boy got lost on the farm. His parents, desperate, asked everyone for help and started searching everywhere. After some time, the boy appeared on the stairs of the abandoned building as if nothing had happened. When his mother asked what he was doing up there, he said he was playing with a man in a cape on top of the building with a rope. When the staff went up to check, they found no one. When he told me this story, I immediately knew it was the same monk I had seen. Over the years, many other stories have happened in that place, and many more will surely happen. The farm hides many secrets, and those souls who suffered so much remain there, waiting for something that no one can fully understand. This place, with all its dark history, will always be an enigma. My name is Paulo, and a few years ago I worked as a night security guard at a mall in my city, Puerto Vallarta. It was a temporary job, but it left me with some unforgettable memories. The mall, which was medium-sized, had 2 floors and housed a variety of stores, a little bit of everything. I was just starting my shift when I met the night attendant, who, after a brief conversation, gave me a warning that stuck with me. He told me that if I ever heard voices coming from the 2nd floor, I shouldn't be scared, as it was a common occurrence. He explained that he had been there for a long time, but when he first started, He was also frightened by the screams and sounds he would hear. When I asked who was behind those noises, he replied that he could never identify them because every time they went up to investigate, the floor was always empty. At that moment, I didn't take it very seriously, thinking he was just trying to scare me, since I was the new guy. When he said goodbye and wished me good luck, I kept thinking it was just a story to impress me. I was left with the responsibility of overseeing the security for the night. The place was practically empty, except for a few areas lit by small lights scattered around. It was already 2 a.m., and I was making my dinner while monitoring the security cameras, when suddenly I heard the screams the attendant had mentioned. At first I thought it was just something fleeting, but as the screams grew louder I became worried. I grabbed my flashlight, left the small office I was in, and headed to the second floor to see what was going on. As I climbed the stairs, the screams got louder, and in addition to that, they were extremely anguishing. It felt as if something terrible was happening to the people upstairs. They weren't just screams, but moans and cries that conveyed a sense of immense suffering. I reached the end of the hallway and began inspecting the stores, one by one. The further I got toward the end of the hall, the more intense the screams became. The last store at the end of the hallway, a large department store I don't want to name, seemed to be the source of the sound. I looked through the store's windows, shining my flashlight inside, but there was no one there. Everything was empty. Despite checking the store from top to bottom, the screams continued until around 3 a.m. After that, the night went on peacefully, and I was confused, but somehow I wasn't afraid. In fact, I was more curious. I never imagined I would have a paranormal experience on my first day at work, which in a way even excited me. The next day, when I told a friend about it, she reacted very differently. When I mentioned the mall's name, her expression completely changed. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me a story I had never heard before. She said that about 10 years prior, a tragic accident had occurred in that department store. At the time, there had been a bachelorette party in an event hall inside the mall, and a gas leak in the kitchen caused an explosion. Most of the people in the area at the time of the explosion, including the cooks and guests, were seriously injured, and some died, including the bride of the party. The news spread quickly, and the mall was closed for over a year. They isolated the affected area until 2 years later, the space was rented again, and the mall reopened. I was shocked by the story. I was only 3 years old when the accident happened and moved to the city years later, so I had no idea about it. After researching later, I found the news reports and realized that the voices I heard at night were undoubtedly the screams of the people who had tragically died there. With this new perspective, my enthusiasm faded away. I felt sad, but at the same time I knew those souls were still tied to the place, trapped in that mall. Over the following months, whenever the clock struck 2 a.m., the screams would repeat, and I'd end up locked in my office, blasting music at full volume to try to drown it out. The screams would last about an hour and then stop, but they always returned the next night. The mall custodian, who became my friend, told me that he also witnessed strange things at the location. He said that on several occasions, he saw silhouettes inside the department store that would disappear quickly without leaving a trace. Additionally, some of the store's employees had also reported that when they were closing the store, the shopping carts would move on their own, and sometimes they heard conversations coming from the manager's office, even when he had already left. With all this, there were no more doubts for me. Those souls were indeed trapped there, and the mall was a place marked by tragedy, where the spirits still roamed, as if they couldn't leave. It's a story that still haunts me to this day, and it makes me reflect on the power of past tragedies and the energy they can leave in a place. My name is Martin. I'm retired now, but before I stepped away from work, I spent many years as a night watchman at a primary school located in Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. Throughout my career, I had several experiences, but one of the most impactful happened during one of my first shifts at the school. For those who don't know, being a night watchman is a solitary job, and often the silence of the night is interrupted by inexplicable sounds. That's exactly what happened one night when I was alone at the school, as usual. I was starting my shift around 10 p.m. The school was completely empty and silent, except for the cold wind cutting through the courtyard. As part of my job, I had to patrol during the night to make sure everything was in order. I remember doing my first round, and since it was extremely cold, I decided to enter a room on the ground floor to take shelter for a while. I sat down in a chair trying to relax, but soon fell asleep. That's when I heard a strange noise. Someone was moving a bench on the upper floor. The sound was quite loud, as if they were rearranging the furniture. I quickly got up and headed to the stairs to investigate. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but I needed to check. I climbed the stairs, entered through a window to shield myself from the cold, and made my way to the room where the sound was coming from. When I opened the door, the room was empty. The light came on, and as I looked around I noticed a bench was out of place, almost where the teacher's desk would have been. This seemed very strange to me because everything had been impeccably arranged when I did the first round. My heart racing, I returned to the ground floor, but as I reached the stairs I felt a strange sensation of being watched. I looked up and saw a woman, or at least something that looked like a woman, watching me through the upper floor window. She had short black hair, but her face was blurry like a shadow. She was very pale and her presence made me freeze. Not knowing what to do, I rushed upstairs, determined to confront her. However, when I reached the window, she was no longer there. A chill ran down my spine, and even though I wasn't very superstitious, I felt an incredibly heavy energy, something indescribable. That feeling made me leave the room as quickly as possible. I returned to my post on the ground floor and sat down again. But before I could calm myself, I heard once more the sound of furniture being moved. Now it sounded like someone was banging the furniture on the floor, and soon after, I began to hear footsteps on the upper floor, as if someone were wearing high heels. My instinct told me to run, but I knew the job required me to stay. So I took a deep breath and went back up, more cautiously this time. As expected, there was no one there. The room was open and I slowly approached. Just as I was about to enter, the door slammed shut as if someone had closed it abruptly. I jumped in fright and quickly looked through the window, but I didn't see anyone. I decided to open the door, and when I turned on the light, I found all the benches out of place, turned over and disordered. It was as if someone had made a mess in there. I put the benches back, and when I turned to turn off the light, I saw the same woman sitting in the corner of the room, near the desk, staring at me. She was wearing a black dress with buttons up to her neck, and her skin was extremely white. Fear took over me, and I ran to the room on the ground floor, locking the door behind me. The terror was so intense that I was sweating cold. I didn't know what else to do, so I started praying, asking that she wouldn't harm me. I heard footsteps descending the stairs, and although I knew I shouldn't, I looked down through the crack in the door. There she was, the shadow of her passing by the window and disappearing into the void, as if she were made of smoke. I froze for a few minutes, completely unresponsive. That was the first time I saw something truly supernatural, and I can guarantee it's not an experience anyone would want to have. I stayed locked in the room until dawn, and when the day broke, my shift ended. When I bumped into a teacher from the school on my way out, he noticed how I looked and joked that I seemed exhausted. I couldn't help but tell him what had happened, and his expression changed completely. He told me in a serious tone that I shouldn't be so scared because the woman I had seen was already dead. He also told me that there were rumors she had been a teacher at the school during its early years, in the 1940s. She was known to be a severe teacher who would physically punish students who misbehaved. According to the stories, she treated the children with great cruelty and seemed to take pleasure in using her position to exert control and seek revenge. Until one day, a group of teenagers decided to play a prank on her, and that's when the tragedy happened. They hid a snake in her room, and when she entered, the snake attacked her. She fell backward, hitting the metal bars, and lost her life right there. After that, several people who had worked at the school, including janitors and night watchmen, left terrified after seeing or hearing something strange. The teacher advised me not to quit because she couldn't harm me anymore. Although I was very frightened, I decided to stay on the job since I needed the work. Over the following months, the noises continued, but I never saw the woman again. Even so, the feeling of discomfort never fully left me. I stayed at that school for many years, and the nights, though quieter, were never the same again. And those were today's stories. Did you like any of them? Comment on which one you liked and tell us if you've ever experienced something like this in your life. Don't forget to like, and I hope to see you in the next video, if you have the courage to watch more stories.